Great. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? So I'm Margaret Levin. I'm the chapter director in Minnesota, and welcome to the webinar today, which is part of the series of orientation sessions for our newest chapter directors. Let's start with some introductions. Just your name and what chapter you're from.
Okay, I'll get started. I'm Julie Rosenzweig. I'm from the Delta chapter, which is in Louisiana.
Great, thanks, Julie.
Hi, Margaret. This is Connie Wilbert. I'm in Wyoming.
Terrific. Do we have any directors joining by phone?
Yes, hi. It's Sam Danowski from Connecticut.
And it's Minda Rebecca from the Bay chapter.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. Let's have our presenters introduce themselves. I know Jarvis just joined, and then we can go ahead and turn it over to you for the presentation.
I'm Christine. I was waiting on Adrian. I'm Christine. I'm a senior financial analyst for the club.
I'm Adrian Frazier. I'm the deputy CFO for the Sierra Club, and our team. I think Christine will talk a little bit about this, but we work directly supporting chapters in their financial reporting. And maybe Jarvis is joining you in the conference room.
I think it might be
We have one more who will be in the conference room any minute, but yeah, we could probably get started, and Jarvis can.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to share my screen and presentation. So, Adrian and Jarvis and I normally work very closely with the chapter treasurers. So it's very nice to have some time with the directors and to talk about the chapter finances with directors. So I'm going to share my screen here. Actually, let me do that first. Oh boy, where it's there, and share. And to there. Okie doke. All right, so can everybody see the presentation?
Yep, I can.
Great. Super. Let's see. So first thing we would like to talk about is the chapter finance versus chapter funding. So note that the chapter funding's presentation will be on October 25th. So if you have any questions on the specifics between chapter finance and chapter funding, that would also be a great presentation to attend. So, and also, so I'm going to go through basically the differences between chapter finance and chapter funding. I'm going to touch on some of the chapter allocations, some budgeting things, roles and responsibilities, and then there'll be some time at the end for questions. So, and then I think the presentation is available too, but please feel free to stop me if you have any questions at any point, and I'll be happy to address them. So the main difference between chapter finance and chapter funding is the C3 versus C4 distinction. So chapter finance, we really support issues around C4 money, and chapter funding supports issues around C3 money. So on an ongoing basis, chapter finance supports the chapters mostly through QuickBooks Online support, which soon will be NetSuite. NetSuite will replace QuickBooks soon. More on that later in the presentation. QuickBooks is really the online tool for tracking revenue and expense for C4 funding. So on an annual basis, we work with chapters mostly on the year-end financial reporting, which is due to National in March. Though treasurers should start collecting data from groups and other sub-entities in January or even as early as November and December. So an important note is that on the year-end reporting, the club and all of the sub-entities, the chapters, the groups, the activity the activity sections all share one EIN. So this means that we're one entity and report to the IRS as one entity. So it's really critical that we have accurate and timely reporting, and that's submitted to National at the year end as one complete report. So also on a yearly basis, we produce the Chapter Affecting Programs Memo, and it's also known as the Chapter Affecting Memo, so they're the same thing. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail later in the presentation as well. Chapter funding handles questions about C3 grant funding, and that includes the foundation fund balances, distributions, and reimbursements. So this is the contact for all of the chapter finance staff, Adrian, me, Jarvis, and Rosa as well. You're welcome to reach out to any of us via email or phone, and then we also have a shared email box here that you can just send general questions to. If you don't know where to direct a question, we're happy to help and get you the information that you need. So a little bit on news and upcoming changes. So there are two big items to talk about today. The first is the Chapter Financial Refinement Task Force that some of you may already know about. The task force was created as a response to the Council of Club Leaders, the Finance Risk Committee, or the FinCom, Finance and Risk Committee, or FinCom, and the chapter directors. We're currently working to provide recommendations to the board in November, although there is potential that that could get pushed back to February. But we're looking at our system as a whole on financial reporting, where we can make improvements, and just generally clarify finances and financial management for chapters. The other big piece of news is the NetSuite implementation. So the implementation for national for NetSuite, which will be replacing PeopleSoft, is on schedule for January 1st of 2019, and the implementation for chapters will begin in 2018. It will begin with a pilot, and then the rollout may be staggered for chapters, and this is really the piece that will replace mainly QuickBooks. So the other piece that kind of comes with this as well is that we will be replacing Clubhouse with Campfire, and that is how some of the reporting will be affected as well. NetSuite will streamline much of the current reporting, resulting in a quote-unquote live reporting. So one of the big issues that we deal with now that I'm sure you're aware of is timing. So some of the timing of the reports and when that data gets back and forth from national to the chapters and vice versa. So when NetSuite's implemented, that will be very close to live, but it will be in much more timely manner. So that's going to be a big improvement. So this diagram here is currently where all of the systems, what all of the systems that communicate to national are. So also of note is the Clubhouse will really be a more modern and interactive site, and it will be replacing Wild and the listservs. There's a really great group function where we'll be able to communicate a lot more readily. So when we have information that goes out about reporting and on how various funds are moving back and forth, we'll be able to do that in a much broader way. So if you've been attending some of the other trainings, you may have already gone over, especially in the digital presentation, some of the different systems that we have, and you'll probably note that they're very disparate. So this really affects and impacts how some of the reporting is done. We will be keeping Workday when NetSuite's rolled out, but this little loop here between PeopleSoft and NetSuite and Workday and STARS should be a lot quicker. So that should be a lot smoother when we make that transition. So moving on.
Christine, I might just add there. I mean, so I think a lot of you're probably pretty familiar with a lot of these systems. One of the challenges that we really have in terms of the reports that we give to chapters, some of them come out of PeopleSoft, which NetSuite will be replacing. Other ones related to the foundation come out of Cougar. Cougar is our grant management system, which is a homegrown system. It was built internally, I don't know, probably over the past 20 years. It's changed and developed over that time. And there's a lot of challenges over what information we can provide because of the limitations of that system. There are plans to replace Cougar. That's going to be, after NetSuite is fully implemented, and I think that will bring even more improvements. NetSuite alone will allow us to improve the information on your foundation that we can provide around like your foundation fund balances, but that will take us an extra step in really streamlining the information. And then, as Christine mentioned as well, in terms of the Workday and STARS, we'll be able to just better integrate this. So, you receive your STARS reports, which breaks out all of your staff time based off of what we currently call the product codes that you report your time to. And that doesn't really end up in QuickBooks Online at all unless you go in there and classify based off of those product codes. That information will be a lot better integrated into NetSuite in terms of being able to easily track all of your staff time by product code right within all of your financial reports, your own chapters, I'll say income statement, you'd be able to look at by the specific product codes that you are charging your time to. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I thought I'd just tell you a little bit more about some of these specifics on these systems and how you currently interact with them and what's hopefully coming.
Great, thanks, Adrian. Does anybody have any questions up until this point?
Yeah, this is Kate Adelson. Sorry to be a few minutes late. Thank you guys so much for doing this. I guess I was just curious to that last point. Is there going to be, sort of specific training as some of these transitions get finalized? Because I think that is helpful information, but I don't know about other folks. I've got so much going on that by the time, it actually becomes implemented, I probably will have forgotten some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to that. We will definitely be having a lot of training around the NetSuite implementation. And I think national staff went through training on NetSuite in June, and there's a lot of different modules. And basically you're able to attend whichever modules are specific to your job function. So I could see chapter directors, like we'll have a reporting and analytics section in which, it'll teach you how to go into the system and run different information. I envision still having like a set of standard reports for chapters, but they'll be a lot more comprehensive. They won't have, your information won't be in a lot of different places. It'll all be able to live within NetSuite. And so we'll have a set of standard reports, but also train you on how to look up different information on your own as well. And we'll be engaging NetSuite throughout the rollout to do training, probably supplemented with training by my team on things that are a little more specific to our organization. But we also have NetSuite has tailored training to Sierra Club specifically, and they're also creating a lot of resources that will be available ongoing for us as well. And we plan to do that for the specific chapter piece of NetSuite as well.
Thanks. And just one other quick follow-up on that. To the extent that you guys can get us information about what the modules will cover and that kind of thing ahead of time, that would be great. Because I know, again, we may be different, but I imagine there are other chapters that are also dealing with this, which is that we've got a few different people who play integral roles in what we are doing with our finances. So we have a administrative assistant who does our day-to-day bookkeeping. We have the treasurer, we have the chapter director, and in some places I'm sure it's different than that, but I'm just saying that there are a few different sort of folks, and because it's different from one chapter to the next, it's probably helpful for us to know what the modules are going to cover so that we can help make the decision about where we may want to have more than one person on it, or just who's the most appropriate person. Because I also just find that with finances in particular, having a little bit of redundancy is so important, because if somebody's out, then all of a sudden you're doing the other person's job or they're doing yours and that kind of thing. And it just, the more information, the better. So we just want to make sure that we're able to make full use of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, and we'll be sure to communicate with, as many directors, chairs, and, we're aware of a lot of the administrative staff at the chapter level that do different aspects of the chapter finances. So we will definitely communicate widely, and we'll want to get as many folks on the trainings as possible. And then you made one other point I wanted to address. Oh, yes, in terms of, it's great too to have people trained on the same thing and covering each other's absences for control purposes as well. That's really best practice in terms of like making sure that, every once in a while someone's on vacation and somebody takes over that piece of managing the finances for good internal controls, which we hope to improve with this system as well.
Okay, great. So the next piece, we thought we would talk about some specifics about national and chapters, actual financials, and leading up to the chapter affecting memo, and the chapter funding allocations. So let's start with the national advancement revenue trends. Let's start the bottom line here. This white line is the business partnerships. So over the last decade, that's been pretty flat and pretty consistent. The green line here, the next one up, is major gifts and planned giving unrestricted. This includes bequests, and it's relatively consistent with a small bump in 2017. The next line up, the blue line, it says MDM net here. This is the membership and direct marketing. This includes all small, recurring, and one-time gifts from members and supporters. And this category has had the largest increase after the 2016 election and has had significant growth since 2015. The red line is the restricted major gifts and planned giving. This also includes bequests and has had the largest and most consistent growth over the past decade. So more on how this impacts the chapter allocation over the next several slides. So this slide, this darker bottom part here is the chapter funding allocation. It's the base C3 distribution. In 2018, this allocation was $5,000 per state, which you can see it's pretty historically consistent and flat. And then the larger chapter funding allocation pool here in the lighter red up top. This has fluctuated a lot more over the last decade. You can see the financial crisis and recovery. And a special note over here to the right is the Trump effect, which resulted in additionally allocated funds for chapters beyond what we had previously budgeted. So, Adrian, I don't know if do you want to add anything to this slide?
Sure, yeah. So just to clarify, this actually is C3 and C4, and the top portion of it demonstrates all of our membership and direct marketing net revenues over time from 2005 to 2017. And so chapters each and every year have been allocated the base allocation is 21.3% of those net revenues. Is your chapter funding allocation. That's the unrestricted allocation that you receive. And you can see back in 2005 through 2010, it's fairly flat. And there was actually a floor at that point of 4.4 million. So no matter what the net MDM revenues, membership and direct marketing revenues that the organization brought in, chapters would receive a funding allocation of 4.4 million. So you can see the conference. Over that same time period that our membership and direct marketing revenues were in decline. There was, a number of events over that time period which led to that. And, we really saw a peak during the Bush years, and then you can really see a significant decline after that. And then in 2008, there was the recession, which led to further decline. So in 2010,
has joined the conference.
the board made the decision that it was going to be a 21 point, they were going to eliminate the $4.4 million floor. So it would just be 21.3% of the overall chapter funding allocation. And then it's a little hard to see here, but the curve starts following the trend a little bit more. As Christine mentioned, we saw a big bump in 2016 when Trump was elected. And I think most of you are aware at that time, the funding allocation was kept flat, and those incremental funds have basically been put in a pool for chapters that are being distributed specifically by the board of directors. Some of that has resulted in incremental funding, which you've seen. There was a recent allocation of, I think, somewhere in about 750,000 C4, I want to say, and somewhere around 600,000 C3. And last year there was a incremental 750,000. So those funds are being allocated by the board in different ways, both in, I'd say capacity building, direct grants for specific projects like the recent RISE events, and as well as just funding based off of your chapter's percentage of the membership. Are there any questions on that? Because this kind of shows you how the amount that's allocated to chapters comes to be.
Yeah, are you able to say anything more about why there was such a sort of significant decline in the early 2000s?
Well, I think in the early 2000s, there was like the .com, and we were really at Bush was reelected. We were in the .com boom, and we were just really seeing a lot of money come in. And in the years following that, as Bush left the White House, political climates that we like as an organization tend to be bad for our fundraising, as I'm sure you're aware, especially in these days. So that was a lot of it. Can't remember when, there was the events, like there was Katrina and then the recession in 2008, and those really significantly hit our funding. In 2011, we also brought in a new director of our membership and direct marketing programs, who really started trying a lot of new different things, and was steadily, I think within a couple of years of her being on board, we started seeing some better results. And regardless of, the political climate and macro factors, but just these last couple of years, we've just started to see significant growth. And I think, if this went out to 2018, you'd see even more growth. Does that help at all?
Yeah. But so I guess what I'm trying to parse out here is what you're saying is that these numbers are directly related to national revenue. It's not about decisions to sort of allocate a smaller percentage to the chapters. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. It's the floor of chapter funding was eliminated in 2010. So that was a direct decision based off of the decline in the revenues. But otherwise, it's always been 21.3%. But it was 21.3% with a floor of 4.4 million. And as we saw that decline, there was a conscious decision to just make it 21.3% with no floor.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So this next slide here highlights some of the various elements of the chapter, how some of the various elements of the chapter allocation have changed over time. So, for example, you'll note that the FRIP and link share allocation has increased from 8,600 in 2012 to 70,000 in 2018. And likewise, the conservation funding has almost doubled in that same period. So this is 2018, the 2018 budget here. So Adrian, I don't know if you want to elaborate on this one as well.
Sure. So This is sort of just to demonstrate that while, for the most part, the unrestricted funding to chapters, you actually don't really see a decrease on this. But if we went back to like 2008 or so, you'd see a decrease in the unrestricted funding. But at the same time, we saw in that first advancement chart that the biggest increase in all of our funding has been in restricted, and that's the same to chapters, and the conservation funding is the shared project funding. So that's an area where there's been a large increase to chapters. This is a little hard to see, but maybe if you look at if you either have your own slide deck open or if you're able to look at this afterwards, the increase in conservation funding from 17 to 18 is significant, and a lot of that was specifically Ready for 100 funding. And yeah, I guess this just, it is interesting to look at in terms of just understanding the trends over time and what funding chapters have received. I think Christine mentioned our bequests and planned giving have done really well in recent years. The organization's made a lot of investments in the planned giving program over the last probably 10 to 15 years, and we're really seeing that. A lot of you probably have seen the bequest allocation you receive at the chapter level increase over time as that's been the case. Any questions on this chart specifically?
Okay. So that brings us to the chapter affecting programs memo, which you can find on Clubhouse currently. You go to administration and then finance, and then it's over here on the left hand, the left sidebar here under chapter affecting programs menu under resources. So this document describes each segment of the chapter funding allocation and includes several worksheets for you to use, and they're organized by chapter. So the memo is updated yearly, and it's currently available on Clubhouse, but it soon will be available on Campfire as well. So there are two worksheets towards the end of the document. So the worksheets describe the allocations in detail, and they correspond to each. They are a little hard to see on this, but if you look at the chapter funding memo, you'll see that each one of these columns here corresponds to one of your accounts in QuickBooks. So each chapter has its own line that's broken out here. Like this first one is Angelus, and then this is account 4034, which is state lobbying funding. And likewise for chapter B is for allocations for accounts 4032, the bequest pool allocation. So these are meant to assist with the budgeting process. So the document really describes in detail how each of those allocations is made, and then has more information about the percentages and how it's calculated. So, and then it leads up to the last 2 pages of the document show a breakout per chapter of the C3 and C4 allocation. And most importantly, they show the timing as well for each one of these allocations. So the 4031 is evenly over 12 months. So you can find your chapter and the amount here on each line. So this is a summary of the previous worksheets and includes the timing. So before I move on, is there any questions about these breakout sheets and how the chapter affecting memo is calculated? No? Okay.
The only thing I might add here is just, in terms of approaching your budget, all you really need is this budget worksheet right here. I mean, I think it's really good to read through the chapter affecting program memo and understand that. And I guess that's not completely true. There's a couple things in there like the benefits rate and things like that can help you create your budget. But this specifically lays out each amount of funding that you would put directly into your budget. And then on the C4 side, the green side, that would go directly into your C4 budget. And then on the pink side, those funds all just get transferred directly into your foundation fund.
Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about is some of the roles and the responsibilities, and how they interact with each other. So the chapter chair, in conjunction with the XCOM, provides chapter financial oversight. Many of the chapters appoint a finance committee for this purpose, but it's not required. So the chapter chair and XCOM, they approve annual chapter budgets and the variances within those budgets. They supervise the chapter financial controls, which is very important if your chapter is being audited, when the club is being audited. And then the chapter chair and XCOM ensure timely and accurate consolidated at the end of the year that's submitted to national, because again, we are one EIN, so it's important that we consolidate all of that in a timely manner and then submit that to the IRS on our 990. The chapter chair and XCOM provide stewardship of group and financial management and reporting, and should adopt a chapter reserve policy. And of course, they support the chapter treasurer, who and they provide direction and guidance to the treasurer. So the chapter director's role is to provide financial leadership with support from the treasurer. And there's three main areas to highlight here that the chapter director is responsible for, and that's budget monitoring, day-to-day cash flow, and ongoing management tasks, several of which are technical in nature and that you are probably already doing or have some training on. That includes like Workday, for example, and approving timesheets so that there's accurate timing and reporting and coding. But the leadership for the budget really is the oversight of monitoring the budget versus actual, and ensuring that the projections are on track, and that the budget will achieve the bottom line, the budgeted bottom line. And that the director is really responsible for ensuring adequate cash flow to meet day-to-day operational needs, and any deficits to national are met. So, and then it's also the chapter director's responsibility to make sure that any compliance issues, either with national or locally, like sales tax and event permitting, is also solid and secure. And then the last role is the chapter treasurer, who we really do interact with quite a bit. So that's the chapter treasurer provides, is responsible for the chapter financial management and should really act as a resource to the director. So, and we act as resources to the treasurer as well. So the treasurer's main responsibilities really do revolve around QuickBooks, both the maintenance and reporting, because again, we do share the one EIN. And all treasurers should, or all directors should have visibility into your QuickBooks. There's a reports only view mode that you should be able to access your QuickBooks. And if you're unable to, please just drop us a note or give us a call and we can make sure that you have that access. And then the other two major reporting functions for the treasurer are reporting to the XCOM on, particularly on budgeting issues, and then reporting to national on the year-end report for both the chapter and then the consolidation of all of the sub-entities as well. So in summary, the key takeaways for today are the Sierra Club, the chapters, the groups, and all of the ICOs and other sub-entities, including activity sections, are one entity. That means that we use the same EIN for all reporting and administrative purposes, including bank accounts, which I know some of you already know. So it's critical that the year-end reporting is timely and accurate so that we can get our 990 to the IRS in a complete and accurate way. And the XCOM holds ultimate responsibility for the financial solvency of the chapter. The chapter director is responsible for the financial leadership of the chapter, and the chapter treasurer is responsible for the financial management of the chapter. So again, happy to have any questions now or later. And again, this is our shared box here. So chapter.finance@sierraclub.org. And yeah, so that is the end of our presentation. And again, happy to answer any questions that you all might have. Let me go back to stop sharing.
Yeah, and feel free to ask anything related to the presentation or not. And, we're also open to any,
anything that we might have missed as well.
Yeah, or anything too that, suggestions you have that might help your chapter. I know a lot of you answered our survey that we just sent out from the Chapter Financial Refinement Task Force, which was really great. And so, we're really digging into those results right now, but anything else that might be particularly you want to bring to our attention, we're open to.
Hi, this is Richard in San Diego. Hi, I'll be on. And I came in a little late, so I didn't. Is the PowerPoint that you have, is that going to be sent out to all of us?
Margaret, I'm not sure how that is handled.
Because I'm just thinking this would be very advantageous for my treasurer to see.
I can certainly send that to
my
you.
administrative assistant who does a lot of stuff, and I would like to actually show this to my executive committee too.
Yeah, I can certainly send this to you. I'm not sure if all of the presentations are available in some sort, but
Great, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And we'll have, we can send out the slides. We've been doing that for the previous sessions, and we'll also have, in a few weeks, we'll have a video available of this session so that your folks from your chapter could watch it if they'd like.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much. That'll be super helpful. This is Kate. I wanted to also jump in again and I hope others have questions too, because I hope I'm not the only one. But I certainly have found the financial management of our chapter to be by far the most difficult part of my job. And I think that I have some specific questions, but I don't want to, overly bog things down. But I do think that I was fortunate enough to be able to attend a treasurer training before I came into this role, because there was an appreciation by our last director that there should be some redundancy. And with him stepping down, the chapter decided to allocate resources so that I could go and attend one of those. It was super helpful, even though it's oriented towards a role that wasn't exactly the role I was taking on. And I would just say that the more that we can have training opportunities for directors, I just think that would be so unbelievably valuable, because many of us have not been trained in any sort of financial management coming into this role. And it's a real challenge, because obviously it's whole own skill set. So just wanted to, I guess, put that out there for you, Adrian, if you were asking about general feedback. I just think there's no way to do too much training. And right now I don't know of anything that's like a standard mandatory financial training for new directors that I think would be really valuable. Also, I had a quick question about the chapter affecting memo and budgeting. Is there any way that, I know you guys are doing your budgeting, and so everything sort of has to, follow suit, because there's only so much you can do before you know the numbers. But is there any way to give us an earlier general idea of like whether we're likely to receive a similar sort of amount of funding for the coming year, or a little bit less, or a little bit more, or a lot less, or in an ideal world, a lot more. I feel like how late in the year that comes out can be really, really tricky. And so I wanted to see if you could speak to that at all.
Sure. Yeah, we know that's a big challenge for chapters, and it's something that I've brought up in the past. And for a little while, the schedule used to be that the finance committee would meet and recommend a budget to the board, and that would happen in late October. So at that point, we got agreement that the chapter funding allocations could go out at that point, but that got eliminated, and now the finance committee and board meets together in mid-November. It's something that I think would be really good if, any opportunities that you have to give feedback to the board or senior leadership of the organization, because it is a challenge because we don't have, nationals numbers yet. So, but if there could at least be some agreement as to what exactly the funding might be earlier on, then we would be able to send that information. But as it is now, a lot of those conversations don't happen until mid-November. I will definitely continue to flag it, and then any opportunities that you all have to flag it might help as well. So I know that's not the most helpful answer, but that's all I've got for now.
No worries. I appreciate that, and I'll certainly keep flagging it and blowing the horn or whatever it is. One other thing I was wondering about is if you could speak a little bit more to cash flow. I've been working with Julian as much as I can possibly get him recently to work with us on understanding some of the moving pieces and questions that we have. And my treasurer actually encouraged me, it's actually I've been doing it since I started, so a couple years ago now, to keep a spreadsheet that we essentially populate on a monthly basis to track our cash flow. And it's been super helpful for me because I'm always learning something that I thought I knew and I didn't know properly. But I was wondering if you all have any suggestions for how to do that, because I don't know if I'm following best practices. And of course, the ebb and flow of money coming and going is another one of those really challenging things to keep on top of. And I think I'm doing a relatively good job, but I don't know how we compare to other chapters, or if you just have any other guidance for proper cash flow management.
You want me to take that one, Christine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, having some sort of spreadsheet or system of tracking it and forecasting out some amount of time, as much as, at the national level, that's basically what we do. And we look at, we look out about a week or so, essentially. And look at, what we expect to come in, what we know is going out. And for us, the timing of the foundation reimbursements is really a challenge. And I imagine it is for you all too. The fact that, we have to spend all this C4 money and only once a month we get reimbursed from the foundations. We're kind of always really waiting for that, and towards the end of that month, right before we receive the foundation building, is really when we need to be tracking things especially closely. But that really is, I think, the best practice. We're hoping, we're going to be trying to look at things within NetSuite on the national level, and how we could maybe automate some of that to make it a little bit easier. And we could definitely look at translating that to chapters as well, whatever we come up with. I don't know if you might have anything to add, Christine, but.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that I think that is best practice, is to have kind of an independent spreadsheet, at least now while we still have this timing issue. And when we do have NetSuite, one of the really great things that they have is a dashboard. And that was kind of what I was alluding to about the live. It's not exactly live. There is still going to be a delay, but it will be significantly less than the time delay that we have right now. But you will be able to build out some dashboards that will probably create some standard cash flow, but then you'll be able to edit and customize them specifically for your own chapter. So it's definitely a big thing to look forward to on NetSuite about the cash flow in particular.
That's really exciting. Thank you.
I do have, Richard in San Diego, I do have a question here. Is there a specific monthly date that we should have our C3 funding requests in by so that we can ensure that they show up in the next monthly report?
I think that might be a better question for chapter funding because they really do handle those reimbursements. So I'm not really sure about their workflow on that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if you missed it, Richard, but and you probably have the schedule, but their presentation's October 25th, so that would definitely be a good question for them.
Because it's just always been haphazard, it seems to me. So
yeah, and it probably depends. If I were to guess, it probably depends on the volume that they receive towards the end of the month. Our books close like something around the 9th business day of the month, and that's actually driven by some of the systems that process like all of the dues and donations that come in. So it would definitely be before that date, but they probably also need a little bit of time before that to make sure it's all processed.
Okay, thank you.
I'd be curious to hear, in terms of, the director's role, the chair, XCOM role, and the treasurer role that we presented, those I think are really best practices, but I'd be curious to hear if it was similar to, how those different roles view their responsibilities at your specific chapters. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Did it look like, okay, this kind of mirrors our chapter? Like, no, that's not. I do all of this, or the treasurer does all of this, or.
So in San Diego, yeah, that's just about the way it operates for us. Although, since I've been involved with the chapter for so long in some other ways, my treasurer comes to me more for questions about QuickBooks. But yeah, I think that's a really good piece of block of information to just reinforce to the treasurer and the executive committee the way things should run.
Yeah, and we've heard that more training around finances and financial responsibility for XCOMs would be a very welcome resource as well.
I think it would be a great resource, but I'm not so sure you could get a lot of my XCOM members to do it. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I could see that.
Yeah, it's getting them to understand everything, and they kind of get glassy-eyed, and yeah. It's always the challenge.
Any other questions?
This is Minda over at the Bay chapter. I don't have any questions, but I just, I feel like I interact with you guys a lot, and I just want to say, thank you so much for always being willing to answer questions, and my treasurer's questions too, and being really receptive and very quick to respond. It helps a lot because I think, Kate mentioned that, we're, as chapter directors, really thrown in, even if we do have financial backing, the Sierra Club's background, the Sierra Club's finances are so completely different from any other nonprofit I've ever seen. So having that, you as a resource, is just very, very welcome. So thank you for that.
Great. Thank you, Minda. And if any, I know we're kind of heading into budget season, and you all, I guess, probably can't do your full budgets until a few months from now when you receive information from us. But definitely reach out as you have questions as you're putting those together. Happy to help with that.
I do have one recommendation to fellow directors, and that is you should get permission to be able to go in and get the monthly funding reports yourself instead of depending upon, sometimes you depend upon your treasurer to provide you that information. I would really talk to your treasurer to make sure that you can get in there and see all of those reports, because it will help tremendously in your planning.
Yeah, and you can contact me about that too if you need login information.
Yeah, I would second that. I've heard in some chapters that staff have been disallowed from receiving some of that information by their treasurers, and just to reinforce that that's not optimal, and you should have access. And I think as the roles are described, you know, that you're in the leadership role, understanding the finances, and the treasurer is there to support you and share information with you.
And that actually does bring up a logistic point. When we do roll out Campfire, which will be replacing Clubhouse, I think at least through the end of the year, the monthly funding reports, you will still access them through your folder on Clubhouse. And then, you know, when we move to NetSuite, those reports will kind of be obsolete. You're not going to have to go to a separate place to get them. They're all going to be there on a dashboard. They'll be built out, and then hopefully we can customize them a little bit more, but that's to come. But for right now, like logistically, like those reports I don't think are going to live on Campfire at least until next year. And then we may end up not doing that either way. So if you need access information to those folders on Clubhouse, you can be in touch with us.
Would you all mind just taking a brief minute to go back to sort of who to contact for what, or if you prefer that we use just the generic email for the team for certain things, just like how best to communicate and access you all in your distinct roles?
I would say on like kind of day-to-day logistic things, Jarvis and I are probably your best bet. Like if you have questions about a report, you can't access a report, you need QuickBooks assistance, like Jarvis and I are really kind of your first bet for that. If you have budgeting questions, anything like that, also Jarvis and I and Adrian too. If you have kind of bigger picture questions, that may be something that goes to the general inbox so that we can all field that depending on how complex the question is and who has the time to immediately deal with it.
Yeah, and we all have access to that chapter.finance box, so that'll always, you know, get communicated to whoever needs to respond.
Right.
And I'm so sorry, I know this is rude, but Christine, can you share your last name again?
Oh, it's McClintock, MCCLINTOCK.
And all our contact info is right in the presentation as well, which will be sent out.
Great. Are there other questions, either from directors or questions from our presenters for us?
I don't have any right now.
Not me.
Okay, well, I think with that we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Adriana and Christine and Jarvis, for joining us. Thanks to all the directors that joined, including the folks on the phone. As we said, we'll send out the slide presentations. We can do that right away, and then we'll have a video of this session coming up. And just appreciate everyone's time.
Great.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.